Before we begin tonight's story, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support helps us bring you more real-life mysteries, tragic disappearances, and shocking truths from the shadows of everyday life. Now settle in, dim the lights, and listen closely, because what started as a simple camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains would end in a 5-year mystery, a heartbreaking revelation, and a family divided forever. In October of 2018, the Great Smoky Mountains were dressed in their autumn best. Ridges rolled like waves beneath a patchwork of red, gold, and deep evergreen. Mist clung to the valleys every morning, pulling back slowly as the sun rose, revealing rivers like silver threads cutting through the wilderness. It was the kind of place tourists snapped postcards of, the kind of landscape hikers saved up vacation days just to see. For David Martinez, these mountains were more than a scenic backdrop. They were home. For over 20 years, he had walked their trails, studied their maps, and guided nervous weekend hikers through their switchbacks and steep climbs. As an Eagle Scout leader, he had taught boys how to tie knots, pitch tents, and respect the power of nature. He knew where the trails were safe and where the rocks grew slick after rain. He knew which ravines to avoid, which creeks could swell suddenly, and where to find shelter when storms rolled over the peaks faster than the forecast predicted. David's 16-year-old son, Jake, had grown up on stories of those mountains. When he was small, he sat cross-legged on the living room carpet in Knoxville, listening to his father describe getting caught in a sudden snowstorm on Klingman's Dome, or waking up to find bear tracks circling his tent. As Jake grew older, those stories turned into shared experiences. Short hikes at first, then day trips, and finally overnight campouts where father and son lay under a blanket of stars, talking about school, life, and everything in between. The trip to Cataract Falls had been Jake's idea. He'd seen photos online, a narrow cascade pouring through moss-covered rock, framed by towering trees and misty air. When David suggested they celebrate the end of midterms with a 3-day camping trip, Jake asked for Cataract Falls without hesitation. He'd been talking about it for months. On October 12, 2018, the night before they left, Jake was too excited to sleep. He packed and repacked his backpack, double-checking his gear. Water bottle, flashlight, extra batteries, compass, pocket knife, socks rolled tight, sleeping bag strapped neatly to the bottom. He texted his girlfriend, Emma, a series of messages, blurry photos of his packed gear, a grinning selfie, and finally, "Dad says we'll be back Sunday by 6. I'll call you when we get out. Love you." The next afternoon, October 13th, David pulled his blue Ford pickup truck into Sarah Martinez's driveway. Sarah, his ex-wife, stood at the door with her arms folded, trying not to show how anxious she felt. Divorce had erased the years they'd shared, and it had erased the way she still worried when he took their only child into the woods. David hugged her briefly, smelling faintly of coffee and sawdust from the construction site where he worked. "We'll be back Sunday by 6, he promised, echoing what he'd told Jake. 3 days at Cataract Falls. He's been looking forward to this for months. Jake bounced beside him, his backpack already strapped on, his face bright with anticipation. "Mum, Dad's got it all planned," he said. "We'll take the standard trail and maybe explore a side ridge, set up camp, do some night hiking." Sarah forced a smile. "You text me when you get service again," she said, straightening his collar as if he was still 8 years old. "And you, David, I know," David said gently. "He'll be safe. You know I'd never take risks with him." Sarah watched them drive away, the pickup truck shrinking down the street until it turned a corner and disappeared. She did not know that this ordinary, almost boring moment, a truck pulling out of a driveway, would be the last time she ever saw her son alive. 3 days later, on October 15th, the house felt too quiet. The sun had already slipped behind the trees, and a cold, early autumn darkness settled over Knoxville. The digital clock on Sarah's phone read 8:47 p.m. David and Jake should have been home 3 hours ago. She sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone for the 100th time, pretending she wasn't listening for the sound of the truck in the driveway. She dialed David's number again. It rang once in her mind, but on the screen it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's David. Leave a message." "David, it's me again," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You said you'd be home by 6. It's almost 9. Call me as soon as you get this, please." She hung up and immediately dialed Jake. His phone went straight to voicemail too. She listened to his recorded voice, lighter, younger than he sounded lately, and her hands began to tremble. Something's wrong. A thought she'd been pushing away all evening rose to the surface like a dark shape underwater. "You don't want to make that call," she told herself. "But you have to." She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number. Great Smoky Mountains National Park Emergency Services. Great Smoky Mountains National Park Emergency Services. "This is Ranger Thompson," a calm male voice answered. Sarah swallowed hard. "My ex-husband and my son," she began, her voice shaking. "They went camping at Cataract Falls. They were supposed to be home today. They're not answering their phones." She forced herself to breathe. They've never been this late. At dawn on October 16th, the trailhead at Cataract Falls was no longer just a starting point for hikers. It had become the center of a search and rescue operation. David's blue Ford pickup sat exactly where he had left it 3 days earlier. The driver's side door was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition. The interior was clean. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no broken glass, nothing disturbed. Just an empty truck in a gravel parking area, surrounded by trees that swayed and whispered in the early morning breeze. Detective Maria Santos arrived at 7 a.m. She was no stranger to disappearances in the Smokies. Lost hikers, injured campers, people who underestimated the wilderness and overestimated themselves. But something about this one felt different. "The vehicle's clean," she told Ranger Thompson, leaning against the truck as she scanned the area. "No signs of forced entry. No sign they turned back early. Nothing missing except their camping gear. It's like they did exactly what they planned. Parked, locked nothing, and walked into the woods." The trail register at the head of the path told part of the story. Under the entry for October 13th to 30 p.m. were the neat, confident words, "D. Martinez plus son. 3-day backcountry. Cataract Falls area." Search dogs picked up their scent immediately. The first mile and a half of trail was straightforward. A well-worn path bordered by ferns and damp earth, following the familiar route toward Cataract Falls. Rangers and volunteers moved in a tight line, scanning both sides of the trail for clothing, footprints, broken branches, anything that hinted at a detour or an accident. Then, without warning, the dogs stopped. They circled, whined, and pulled at their leashes in random directions, as if the scent they'd been following had evaporated into thin air. "That's not normal," said Jim Collins, the lead dog handler. "These dogs can track a scent for miles, even after rain." And there had been rain. On October 14th, a sudden storm had rolled through the mountains, drenching the forest. Temperatures dropped sharply, and an unusual early snow dusted the higher elevations. What might have been footprints or scuff marks in the soil were washed clean, then frozen over. The weather, always an unpredictable partner in the Smokies, was working against them. For 48 hours, teams searched every inch of the Cataract Falls area. Helicopters circled above, but the dense forest canopy turned the view below into a solid green carpet. From the air, it was nearly impossible to see anything beneath those leaves. Ground teams checked every cave, every natural shelter, every steep creek crossing. They called out names: David, Jake until their throats were raw. They found nothing. By October 18th, the search had expanded to cover more than 50 square miles. Local news crews arrived, setting up cameras near the trailhead, broadcasting live updates to viewers across Tennessee. Volunteers from Knoxville drove up to join the effort. Neighbors, co-workers, church members. David's entire construction crew took time off to join the search, gripping radios and maps instead of hammers and nails. Still nothing. On the fourth day, in a cramped office at the ranger station, Detective Santos sat down with Sarah. A map of the search grid lay spread across the table between them, streaked with red circles and blue lines. Sarah's eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. "We have to consider all possibilities," Santos said gently. "Accidental fall, animal encounter, getting lost and dying of exposure." Or she hesitated. "Or what?" Sarah demanded. "Sometimes people choose to disappear." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger, hot enough to burn through her exhaustion. "David would never abandon Jake," she said. "Never. You don't understand him. He lives for that boy." But as the days passed and the forest remained stubbornly silent, that once unthinkable possibility began to creep into everyone's minds. Could David have run? Could he have taken his son with him into a new life, somewhere beyond the reach of debt collectors and court dates? The investigation into David's life revealed cracks Sarah hadn't known about, fractures hidden beneath the surface of the devoted father and experienced outdoorsman. In a small conference room at the Knoxville police station, Detective Santos laid a manila folder thick with financial records across the table. "Did you know about the debt?" she asked. "No," Sarah said, frowning. "We split everything in the divorce." He said he was fine. Santos slid the papers toward her. Credit card statements with balances climbing toward $30,000. Personal loan documents. A second mortgage on David's house she'd never heard about. When Sarah added the numbers, her stomach turned. The total was nearly $80,000. He had a court hearing scheduled for October 20th, Santos said quietly. Child support enforcement was pressuring him for missed payments. They were considering jail time. Sarah stared at the dates, the cold, impersonal numbers. While she had been packing lunches and working double shifts as a nurse, David had been sinking deeper into a hole he couldn't see a way out of. "There's more," Santos continued. David called in sick to work on October 10th and 11th. His supervisor said he seemed stressed, distracted. He asked about cashing out his pension early. Sarah suddenly remembered the last time they'd spoken in person before the trip. David had seemed distant, as if something heavy were weighing on him. She'd chalked it up to work, to the stress of co-parenting, to life. Now she wondered what she had missed. Family and friends painted conflicting pictures. David wasn't running from anything, insisted Miguel Martinez, David's younger brother. He lived for that boy. You should have seen them together on their hiking trips. Jake worshipped his father. But even Miguel admitted David had been acting strange lately. "Last month, he asked me to promise something weird," Miguel told Santos. "He said if anything ever happened to him, I should make sure Jake knew how much he loved him. I told him to knock off the drama. I didn't think he meant something like this." Jake's girlfriend, Emma Chen, added another troubling piece to the puzzle. Jake said his dad had been talking about starting fresh somewhere, she told detectives. "I thought he meant moving to a new city or getting a new job." Jake was kind of excited about it, but he was also worried. He said David had been making weird jokes about disappearing. Then there was the life insurance policy. David had a $200,000 policy naming Jake as the primary beneficiary. Since Jake was a minor, Sarah would control the money if both father and son were declared dead. "I don't want the money," Sarah told Santos, tears burning in her eyes. "I want my son back." 3 weeks into the search, nighttime temperatures in the mountains began dropping below freezing. Survival experts were blunt. Even experienced hikers would struggle to last more than a few days lost in those conditions, without proper shelter and food. And if David and Jake were injured, the odds were even worse. On November 15th, exactly 1 month after the disappearance, the active search was officially called off. Reporters gathered as park officials stood in front of microphones, offering carefully worded condolences and promises that the case would remain open. The cameras caught Sarah's face in the background, pale, hollow, and stunned. The first year was the hardest. Sarah refused to accept that they were gone. She hired a private investigator who retraced the known steps, interviewed hikers, combed through footage from gas stations and highway cameras. Nothing. She organized monthly search parties, small clusters of volunteers who hiked lesser-known trails, hoping they might stumble upon a campsite, a dropped backpack, some sign the official teams had missed. Every few months, a new lead surfaced. A hiker would report seeing two people who looked like David and Jake on a distant trail. A gas station security camera would capture grainy footage of a man with David's build. But each lead led nowhere. The man in the footage always turned out to be someone else. The hikers were mistaken. Hope fled, then crumbled. The hiking community in East Tennessee refused to let the story fade. Annual memorial hikes in David and Jake's honor drew hundreds of participants. Trailheads posted missing posters that remained up for months, then years. A scholarship fund was established in Jake's name for students interested in environmental science. Because Jake had once said he wanted to work with wildlife, maybe even become a park ranger. As year two began, even the most optimistic supporters started quietly accepting what Sarah couldn't bring herself to say aloud. They're gone. The insurance company waited. Legal declarations of death usually required 7 years of absence. But dangerous circumstances like disappearing deep in the wilderness could shorten that timeline. Sarah resisted. Signing those papers felt like killing them herself. By year 3, she began seeing a grief counselor. The sessions helped her keep functioning, helped her get out of bed, go to work, talk to patients. But the questions never stopped gnawing at her. What really happened? Did Jake die quickly? Or did he suffer? Was David lying injured somewhere, having watched his son die? Had David run away? Was Jake alive somewhere, angry that his mother had given up? In year 4, exhausted and facing mounting legal pressure, Sarah finally agreed to the death declarations. The paperwork was processed in March 2022, nearly 4 years after David and Jake vanished. The $200,000 insurance payout went to Sarah as Jake's legal guardian. She used most of it to pay off her mortgage and put the rest in savings for a future she didn't quite believe in. The money felt like blood money payment for a tragedy she still didn't understand. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in graduate school at the University of Georgia, a young wildlife researcher named Dr. Rebecca Chen was perfecting drone technology that would change everything. Rebecca's work focused on black bear populations in remote wilderness areas, places where traditional fieldwork was dangerous or nearly impossible. Her drones could navigate steep ravines, dense forests, and rocky cliffs, capturing high-resolution footage and mapping animal movements with incredible precision. She wasn't looking for missing people. She was looking for bears. She had no idea her research would solve one of Tennessee's most puzzling missing person cases. On September 23, 2023, Rebecca stood on a remote ridge 8 miles northeast of Cataract Falls. The air was sharp and cool, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves. Ravens circled overhead. Below her lay a valley so steep and overgrown that most hikers would never even contemplate entering it. Rebecca launched her drone, watching on a tablet as it rose, then dipped low over the treetops, its rotors buzzing like an oversized insect. The terrain was brutal. Steep ravines carved by centuries of water erosion. Trees packed so tightly together that their branches were upon into a canopy that blocked out most sunlight. Rock slides scarred the slopes, and jagged boulders jutted out like broken teeth. At 2:47 p.m., something on the monitor caught her eye. In the middle of that dense valley, the drone's camera picked up shapes that didn't belong. Amid the chaos of leaves and branches and rocks, she saw straight lines, geometric shapes, rectangles. "What is that?" she muttered, zooming in. Through the veil of leaves, the camera captured the faint outline of something artificial. What looked like the edge of a tarp, faded and mottled with lichen, stretched between trees. Nearby, other shapes emerged, a rectangular object on the ground, a circle of stones arranged too neatly to be natural. Her heart rate quickened. This wasn't an animal den or a random collection of debris. This was human. She marked the GPS coordinates and radioed them in. Then she made a call to the park rangers. "I need a recovery team at these coordinates," she told the dispatcher. "It might be nothing, but I don't think it's nothing. I think I found a long-term campsite where there shouldn't be one." 2 days later, a specialized rescue team rappelled into the valley. It was as bad as the maps suggested. Steep, slippery, choked with undergrowth. One misstep could mean a long slide into rocks or worse. But the team moved slowly, carefully, following the coordinates Rebecca had provided. What they found at the bottom defied expectation. The campsite was elaborate. This wasn't a weekend setup thrown together on a whim. It was built for survival. A lean-to shelter stood against the side of a rocky outcrop, reinforced with branches and stones. Its roof layered with tarps and evergreen boughs to shed rain and snow. A fire pit sat in front of it, surrounded by a ring of carefully arranged stones, blackened from repeated use. Food storage containers hung high from tree branches, a method used to keep supplies out of reach of bears. There were makeshift benches, a basic washing area near a small creek, and a half-finished fence of branches, as if someone had started building a perimeter. Scattered around the campsite were familiar items: a blue backpack with a broken zipper, a camp stove, a dented metal mug, a sleeping bag with a worn patch on one side. Serial numbers and receipts later confirmed what Ranger Thompson said over the radio that day. With a heavy voice, "It's them," he announced. "We found David and Jake's campsite." But where were David and Jake? As the team searched the immediate area, one of them spotted something beneath a pile of stones and a camouflage tarp tucked into a crevice. Carefully, they pulled away the rocks and lifted the tarp. Inside was a leather-bound journal, dry and remarkably well preserved despite the years. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. It was David Martinez. The first entry was dated October 13, 2018, the day they disappeared. The last entry was March 20, 2019. They had survived in the wilderness for 5 months. Detective Santos called Sarah at 6 p.m. on September 27, 2023. Sarah was at home, folding laundry in front of a muted television, running the evening news. "Sarah, this is Detective Santos," the voice said. Sarah's heart lurched. "Did you find them?" she asked, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Are they alive?" There was a pause on the line, a moment that stretched into an eternity. "No," Santos said softly. "They're not alive. But we found answers. I need you to come to the station." In the station's conference room, Sarah sat at the same table where she had stared at financial records years earlier. Across from her, Santos opened the journal to the first entry and slid it gently across the table. October 13, 2018. Sarah read aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Jake doesn't know yet, but we're not going back home. At least not the way we planned. I've been lying to everyone, including myself. The debt is worse than I told Sarah. Child support enforcement is threatening jail time. I can't go to prison, I can't leave Jake alone. This is the only way. Sarah's hands trembled. He planned this, she whispered. He planned to disappear. Santos nodded sadly. Keep reading. The entry dated October 14th described how David had led Jake off the established trail, following a route few hikers ever took. Told Jake about the detour today, David had written. He thinks we're just extending our camping trip. I've been stashing supplies in this valley for 3 weeks. Food, water, purification tablets, winter gear. Jake doesn't suspect anything yet. He's just happy to be camping longer. As Sarah read deeper into the journal, the story unfolded in a painful, intimate chronology. David had been secretly preparing for months. He had researched off-grid survival, studied maps to find the most remote valley within reach of Cataract Falls, and hiked there alone multiple times to cache supplies. He had convinced himself that disappearing was a better fate than prison, that running into the wilderness with his son would be a twisted kind of protection. But Jake had not been a willing participant, not at first. October 20th, 2018. Jake is asking when we're going home. I had to tell him the truth about the legal troubles. He's angry and scared. Called me selfish, and I think he's right. But what choice did I have? Prison wouldn't help anyone. Sarah could picture it. The moment when the illusion of an extended camping trip snapped. When Jake realized his father wasn't just hiking, he was running. She imagined the fury in her son's eyes, the betrayal, the fear. She imagined David trying to justify the unjustifiable. Another entry, dated November 2nd, told a different story. Jake is adapting better than I expected. His scouting skills are keeping us alive. He built a better water collection system than mine. Still asks about Mum every day. I tell him we'll contact her when it's safe. The winter entries painted a picture of harsh survival. Bitter cold nights, snow piling against the lean-to, hands raw from chopping wood and setting snares. They hunted small game rabbits, squirrels and foraged for edible plants. They boiled water from the creek. They reinforced their shelter against storms. December 25, 2018. One entry read. Jake made me a Christmas gift from pine needles and bark. For Mum, he said, for when she sees us again. He knows she's worried. We're both losing weight, but staying strong. Jake is becoming a man out here. I'm proud and terrified. Another, dated February 10th, 2019. Saw search helicopters again today. Jake wanted to signal them. I convinced him we're not ready. Need more time to plan our next move. Jake is starting to question my judgment. He's right too. Slowly, in David's own words, the story shifted from an escape plan to a tightening trap. They were alive, but they were not free. Every decision David made pulled them deeper into isolation. Then, in mid-March, everything changed. March 15th, 2019. Everything is ruined. Jake fell collecting firewood from the cliff face. The rope anchor failed. 30-foot drop onto rocks. I got to him as fast as I could, but his injuries are too severe. Leg shattered. Internal bleeding. No way to get help without revealing ourselves. My son is dying, and it's my fault. Sarah's vision blurred as she read the next entry, dated March 16th. Jake died at sunrise. I held him all night. His last words were, "Tell Mum I love her." I buried him where he can see the mountains he loved. I can't live with what I've done. The final entry, March 20th, 2019, was short. This is my last entry. Sarah, if you ever read this, know that I loved Jake more than my own life. I thought I was protecting him. Instead, I killed him. I'm going to join him now. We'll be together. I'm sorry for everything. The conference room was silent except for Sarah's quiet sobs. Around her sat Miguel, Emma, and a few close friends. Detective Santos gave them time, the walls seeming to close in under the weight of the truth. Using David's detailed descriptions, recovery teams located Jake's burial site on a ridge overlooking the valley. A careful stone cairn marked the spot. Beneath it, they found the 16-year-old's remains, undisturbed, just as David had described. 2 miles from the campsite, at the base of a 200-foot cliff, they found David's body. The position of the bones, the fractured vertebrae, everything pointed to a deliberate jump. The coroner's report aligned with the journal's timeline. Jake had died on March 16th. David had survived for more days before taking his own life. They survived in the wilderness for 5 months. Santos told the assembled family in another meeting. Jake's death was accidental. A climbing anchor failed while he was gathering firewood. David's death was ruled as suicide. The revelation shattered the fragile narratives people had built in their minds over 5 years. Sarah felt a storm of emotions she could barely name. Grief for her son's lonely death in the mountains. Rage at David for dragging Jake into his nightmare. Heartbreak for the man she had once loved, now revealed as both devoted father and architect of a tragedy. She wanted to scream at him and embrace him at the same time. Miguel struggled too. David wasn't a bad man, he told reporters eventually. He was a desperate man who made terrible decisions. He loved Jake more than anything. That's what makes it so hard. Emma, now in college, reread the last texts she'd received from Jake. He was excited about the camping trip, she said, but he was also worried about his dad. He said David had been acting weird, making comments about new adventures. I should have told someone. I just thought it was normal teenager stuff. The insurance investigation became complicated. Technically, David had committed fraud by faking his death and disappearing to avoid debts. But he was now genuinely dead. Sarah had clearly been an innocent victim, kept in the dark about his plan. In the end, the insurance company decided not to pursue charges. David's debts died with him. The money Sarah had already used to secure her home would not be clawed back. The legal knots were cut, but the moral ones remained. Had David been a loving father driven to desperate measures, or a selfish man who endangered his son to escape his own problems? The community split into 2 camps. Some saw him as a tragic figure, overwhelmed by financial pressure, legal threats, and the fear of losing his son. Others viewed him as a criminal whose reckless decisions had cost an innocent teenager his life. Sarah found herself in the middle of that divide, defending David with one breath and condemning him with the next. He wasn't evil, she told a reporter from the Knoxville News-Sentinel. He was broken. Desperate people make desperate choices. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps me understand how he could convince himself this was the only way. The discovery forced uncomfortable conversations about mental health, financial stress, and the lack of support systems for struggling parents. David's situation, overwhelming debt, legal trouble, family pressure, was tragically common. But most people in similar circumstances didn't vanish into the wilderness with their children. David's mistake was believing he had to solve everything alone, said Dr. Patricia Williams, a family crisis counselor who studied the case. He saw disappearing as his only option, even though there were other paths: bankruptcy, legal aid, therapy, community support. But shame can be a powerful trap. Sarah decided she couldn't let Jake's story end with a cliff and a journal. Using part of the insurance money, she established the Jake Martinez Memorial Fund, providing emergency financial assistance to families struggling with child support crises. The goal was simple: to keep parents from feeling so cornered that they considered desperate, irreversible choices. The fund quietly helped dozens of families stabilize. Child support payments were negotiated, legal counsel secured, temporary relief granted. More than once, a father or mother sat in a cramped office, relief washing over their face as they realized their situation, while serious, was not hopeless. If David had talked to someone, Sarah said in an interview, a counselor, a support group, even just a friend, maybe he would have seen another option. Maybe he would have realized that disappearing wasn't a solution. Maybe Jake would still be here. Miguel eventually found a kind of peace. David loved Jake more than anything, he said. He made awful choices, but love was his motivation, not hate. That doesn't undo what happened, but it stops me from hating him. On a cold October morning in 2023, exactly 5 years after the disappearance, father and son were finally laid to rest together at Highland Memorial Cemetery in Knoxville. Weathered hikers stood beside Jake's former classmates. David's co-workers lined up next to neighbors and strangers who had followed the story on the news. The funeral drew hundreds. Sarah stood at the podium, her black coat shifting in the wind, a folded piece of paper in her hand. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone with tears. David taught Jake to love the outdoors, she said. He taught him to be self-reliant, to respect nature, to protect the people he cared about. Those lessons kept them alive for 5 months in conditions most of us can't imagine. David's final mistake, his decision to disappear, doesn't erase the good father he was for 16 years. I choose to remember all of him, not just the worst thing he ever did. She looked down at the 2 caskets, one larger, one heartbreakingly small. I forgive David, she said quietly. Not because what he did was right. It wasn't. I forgive him because forgiveness is how I heal. Jake would want us to forgive. He loved his father. I won't let his last words, "Tell Mom I love her," be overshadowed by our anger. In the months that followed, Sarah returned to her work as a nurse, tending to broken bones, fevers, and quiet emergencies that would never make the news. At home, on quiet evenings, she sometimes opened David's journal to the entries that weren't about survival or fear, but about Jake's kindness, his curiosity, his quirky sense of humor. Jake spent an hour today trying to make a squirrel come closer. One entry read, "He talked to it like it was an old friend, patient and gentle. I watched him and thought, this boy is better than me in every way." Those passages reminded Sarah of the man she had loved years ago. Before debt and fear and shame took root, they reminded her of the boy who had once thrown his arms around her waist, smelling like smoke and pine needles after a day in the woods, chattering about waterfalls and bear tracks. The mountains had kept their secret for 5 long years, their ridges and valleys silent witnesses to a father's desperate plan, a son's reluctant adaptation, and a tragedy neither could escape. In the end, it wasn't a hiker, a hunter, or a random chance discovery that revealed the truth. It was technology, a drone buzzing over treetops, piloted by a researcher looking for bears. Sometimes the most unbelievable discoveries aren't about what we find, but about what they force us to confront. How ordinary people, facing impossible circumstances, can make choices that change everything forever. In the end, David Martinez did get what he said he wanted. He and Jake were together, buried side by side under the Tennessee sky. But the cost of that wish was higher than anyone should ever have to pay. If this story moved you, troubled you, or made you think about the hidden struggles people carry, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to tell the stories behind the headline, stories of loss, love, desperation, and the fragile threads that hold families together. Turn on notifications, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and remember, behind every missing person's poster is a life of family and a truth waiting to be found.